Well, welcome. We're very, very pleased to welcome Governor Hickenlooper to campus tonight. Those of you who showed up thinking that there were going to be free samples of Colorado's most famous product are going to be disappointed.
Talking about the beer or the pot?
I know he has a pecuniary interest, or formerly did, in the latter. But I'd also like to welcome back our great friend and former fellow Jackie Combs, who's returning to campus. This is the first time since you've been a Pritzker Fellow here to do the questioning. Tomorrow night in this room we'll be hosting a panel discussion on America's opioid crisis. On Monday the 23rd, I'll be in conversation with former White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, and then later that evening we will welcome former Secretary of the Navy and Mississippi Governor Ray Mabus. So a number of activities coming up in the near term. As always, you can find out more about our events on our website, politics.uchicago.edu. We'll open the floor for audience questions after a moderated discussion between Jackie and the governor, and we'll line up behind the microphone in the center aisle. As usual, we'll give priority to students for the first three questions, and as always, we ask that your questions end in a question mark. Please make sure that your phones are silent. The restrooms are on the first floor for those who need them. And now to formally endorse. Ooh.
I'm done.
It's an artifact of a different life of mine. Here to formally introduce our speaker is Charlie Rollison. Charlie is a second year from Coconut Creek, Florida, studying political science and public policy. She is an intern for the Urban Policy Research Program and serves as communications director for the University of Chicago Democrats. Please join me in welcoming Charlie to the podium.
Good evening. Today we warmly welcome Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper into our Institute of Politics Speaker Series family. A geologist turned brewer extraordinaire, Governor Hickenlooper's entrepreneurial spirit and drive has helped shape the economic success of his city and state today. Becoming mayor of Denver in 2003 with a whopping 65% of the total vote and without prior political experience, Governor Hickenlooper tackled the city's $70 million budget crisis, pushed funding for one of the largest mass transit systems in the country, and was named one of Time magazine's 5 best big city mayors in America in 2005. In addition to winning his 2011 and 2014 gubernatorial races in Colorado, Governor Hickenlooper's notable successes include championing high environmental and ethical standards while maintaining his pro-business stance, launching a $9.5 million statewide youth apprenticeship and career readiness program, and lastly, but perhaps most excitedly, drinking a beer with President Obama in 2014. Moderating the discussion with Governor Hickenlooper today is the brilliant White House editor for the LA Times, Washington Bureau, Jackie Combs. Before joining the LA Times, Ms. Combs was a White House correspondent for the New York Times and chief political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Jackie Combs and Governor John Hickenlooper.
Thank you very much, all of you, for coming out. I usually did these things, it was after dark. And in fact, the last time I was here, just to tell you how much things have changed, was set up. I was sitting along there, and it was a little over a year ago, and we were talking trade and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and how it was dead, and trade, free trade in general was in question, and yet here we are. Now Trump is talking about actually revisiting that, or then again, maybe not. It depends. If it's as they say, if it's Tuesday Trump or Thursday Trump, they contradict each other. I was really pleased to come here to be the person who gets to question Governor Hickenlooper. It was mentioned that he drank beer at his what had been his original brew pub with President Obama. I was the pool reporter literally that day for the White House visit to Denver, for the president's visit. So there I was for a long time next to the pool table watching these two guys drink beer when I could not and play pool when I could not. And I thought he let the president beat him, but he swears the president did it fair and square. And then a second time once we left. So,
But what's not well known is that the president, and I don't think this has ever been reported, you can correct me, but the president had a pool table on the third floor of the White House. And he, when he had complicated things to think about, he would go up there and shoot pool just to kind of have something to do while I was really trying to think through gnarly issues. And I lost fairly and squarely, but he had an unfair advantage in practice.
well, I thought neither one of you had an advantage because I find I play much better pool when I drink a lot. Neither one, you two had only had one drink, but anyway, I digress. Because the governor's from Colorado, I was struck in a little bit of hearing his background. I want you to briefly tell the folks a little about your pedigree, because it's not at all from Colorado, and in fact goes back to the founding era and the Morrises of Pennsylvania. So talk about the Morrises and the Hickenloopers briefly, and then get yourself to Colorado and I'll take over.
I'll give you the concise version. So my mother was a Morris, was from an old Philadelphia family. She was 12th generation in Philadelphia. And my father was also John Hickenlooper. He was from Cincinnati. So it was kind of this confluence of, and I never, my father died when I was quite young, when I just turned 8 years old. And I was raised by my mother. I was the youngest of 4 kids. And my mother's old Philadelphia family lost all their money in the Depression. So there was no great advantage. As a matter of fact, as close as I could see, zero advantage to being a Morris. And basically was ill-suited. I was ill-suited as a Morris or as anyone for school. I was skinny, I had thick glasses, I was dyslexic. I never got an A in high school, never got an A in college. And I guess I overcompensated learning how to get along with people. I was kind of bullied when I was a kid. But finally got accepted to Wesleyan University, which in those days was much easier to get into, and studied English until my friends convinced me that I sucked as a writer as I was about to graduate. So they had a special program for getting a master's in geology for non-science background people. So I went back and I did 1 year as a special student, and then I enrolled as a geology, earth and environmental science graduate student, and finally got a degree, did 2 summers north of Yellowstone Park in the high Absarokas of research, and ultimately, after 9.5 years, finished and left Wesleyan. Some of the geology professors joined together and got a sheet of sheepskin and gave me tenure as a student. But anyway, so that, as a geologist, that's how I got to Colorado. Geology, Denver was about the only place where they were still hiring geologists in the late 70s, early 80s.
Well, to fast forward to the present, you are here. You were earlier today with Governor Bill Haslam of Tennessee, who's a Republican governor, to do a panel. You are known for getting together with John Kasich, the Republican governor of Ohio, and possibly some would have it that you're going to run on a third party or unity ticket with him. You can address that. And then you've made a foray to Iowa this month, I think April 3rd, right? But it wasn't your usual checking out Iowa if you're at all interested in the White House. You were there, again, with a Republican governor, Kim Reynolds of Iowa, about education, I think, and workforce development.
Workforce training, yeah.
And so that's sort of, you and Republican governors, that's sort of an odd way to sort of, maneuver towards figuring out if you're going to run for the Democratic nomination for president. So is there a method to your madness?
No, it's certainly not politically astute. I think it's important right now, and I began working with Kasich. I recruited him because I had heard from other Republican governors that he was adamant against rolling back coverage, especially for Medicaid, as all the coverage that had been expanded under the Affordable Care Act. He wanted to protect it. And I thought it was important that we have a Republican and a Democrat both agreeing to certain compromises about what we could do to strengthen the ACA and make sure we didn't roll back coverage, and yet recognizing, both of us, that we have to control the incredible medical inflation, what that's doing to the federal budget and to our state budgets. So Kasich was, and it's interesting, he's been in politics. I mean, I never ran for student council or class president. He's been in politics for, I mean,
Since Ohio State.
Yes, in
He was
1990.
student body president.
Yeah, exactly. In 1994, he was the chair of the House Budget Committee. I mean, back to '94. So he knows so much about politics, and we were just a good. I really like him. We're very different. We're not going to run together. That will never happen. But I think it's important that we see some models of Republicans and Democrats trying to address some of these really difficult issues.
And so it gets to the point, in the age of polarization, and people are saying the Democratic Party is moving farther left in the age of Trump. So this is very much at odds with what you'd think a person. Do you think your party is moving more to the left as a response to Trump, or that's exacerbating a move that was already underway?
Well, certainly there is a level, and I think it's exacerbating a move that was already underway.
And I guess I shouldn't say exacerbating sounds like a pejorative. Like, I think it's not a.
Right.
So it just.
It's amplifying, let's say.
Yeah.
Is it amplifying that kind of a move? And I think that is fair. To some extent, certainly the vocal parts of the party, a lot of the younger Democrats and Democrats of all ages feel very strongly they want single payer, universal coverage, but a single payer. They want to make sure that unions are much stronger than they are. I think the two sides of the Democratic Party aren't that far off, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a big supporter of universal coverage. I just think politically we can get there quicker than trying to change the whole system to a single payer. Mm-hmm. That's not that big a difference when you actually get down to it. Now, people in today's climate, people roll up their sleeves and are ready to duke out any difference, mm-hmm. right, in their own party or against the other party. But I think most Democrats agree on the basic core elements of what the Democratic Party stands for, right? Mm-hmm. Civil rights, social justice, supporting small businesses and the creation of jobs, making sure that there is what I've been calling, inclusive prosperity, mm-hmm. where everybody gets a share of the economic growth of the community. I think Democrats will fight over different parts of that, but most of those core elements are shared by everybody.
Well, and I want to stay on that a second, but let's just get it out there. What is your interest in 2020? Are you running?
The first interview that I've done where someone does it right in the beginning. Usually it's right at the very end.
So I can keep you nervous the whole time?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
not talking. No. Usually that allows me to stall and just kind of flip-flap, get away from the question.
No, let's get it over with.
So I am. I have about the best team of people that I'm working with that I've ever had. Public service or when I was in business, I've got a cabinet. Just hired a couple new people from my last year, and I'm term limited out, who are remarkably talented. And we're doing stuff around healthcare, as I was describing. I think we've held the inflation of Medicaid in the state of Colorado, been almost flat for 2 years, actually be down a little bit. We're doing a workforce stuff, apprenticeships, and not just for plumbing and electricians, but for people who want to work in a bank or an insurance company. Kids can go and be an apprentice, work a couple days a week, and then go study a couple days a week. And then what they study not only will get them their high school degree, but it'll make them more successful at their job. Kids love it, the businesses love it, and I think that kind of workforce preparation and training is crucial. So, long story, we have 3 or 4, I think, groundbreaking, powerful initiatives that we're really pushing. The moment I start talking about, here's why I think I'm right for 2020, and here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I would articulate what I bring to the table, as soon as I put the time into that, and that all those, being able to have those, to articulate those things takes time. You have to think through your language, what's your elevator speech, you have to do all that. Mm-hmm. the moment I start putting time into that, not only am I distracted, but I distract my cabinet, all these amazing people that have, some of them have just got 1 year to finish putting together the vision, the integrated, coherent plan around what we're going to do about workforce. So what I tell everyone, I'm honest, I talk about it with my wife. It's a tremendous compliment that someone like yourself would even ask me. But my focus right now is 100% on finishing strong.
Well, you say that, but you're not in Denver today. And you're not going to be in Denver tomorrow. You're going to be in Washington tomorrow. And you've been these other places. So there is a certain, so there are things you have to do if you have any, it's just a given. If you're going to run for president of the United States, after the midterms are over, the Wednesday after the midterm results are in, the presidential race is off and running. But you're doing things right now, anybody who's interested. So what are those kind of things? You're talking, like give an example, you're talking to people here in Chicago.
Well, but I'm not doing...
Like to be tutored, not tutored, but to learn, sort of national politics and policy.
So when I get a chance, if I was really preparing to run for president, I probably wouldn't sit up on a stage in front of 250 people with a very moderate Republican governor and talk about all the places we can find compromise and where we think we can move things forward in our states. And governors are less partisan than almost any other elected official. We love to steal each other's best ideas. And I know for a fact Bill Haslam's going to steal a couple of my best ideas I talked about today. He'll go back to Tennessee. He'll make them better. He'll improve them. And then in 2 years, I'll steal them right back, right? And they'll be even better, and then he'll steal them back. We do that all the time. That's not preparation for running for president. Now, I did, drove back. David Axelrod was kind enough to come moderate that. So drove back and then spent an hour with him asking, so what is it like? What should I be thinking about, right? So when I come in contact with people like that, I avail myself of the opportunity. But I'm going to D.C. not for any of those meetings, but to talk to the recreation industry, the outdoor recreation industry, which is, we've been helping organize them into a political action arm where they're going to, for the first time, get involved in local politics, but around clean air, clean water, public lands. No, not going to be partisan. Again, of no use in a Democratic primary, but I think an opportunity to begin rethinking how we politically organize ourselves in this country, and begin to address. I mean, think about it: county commissioners or municipal elections, where a lot of people running are coming out of that kind of that mantra of clean air, clean water, public lands. Those are values that many, many people really care about.
Let me go back quickly to healthcare. You said you were sympathetic to single-payer system or supportive of it, but you thought the best way is to sort of transition there by making better what we have now. What exactly do you think we should do at the federal level to make the healthcare system better?
Sure.
Especially since arguably the Obamacare system, quote unquote, is being sabotaged at some of the states. And at the federal level by some of the rules that have been put out, so that many insurance companies, including 2 just last week, are blaming, regulations coming out of Washington for forcing them to raise premiums. Whether it's true or not, that's what they're willing to say. What do we need to do to make it work better?
So in the private markets, I think, and again, this is what Kasich and I were, and it ended up being 5 Republican governors and 5 Democratic governors, looked at the CSRs, in other words, the little bonuses that are paid for people that are working and don't make quite enough money to really be able to afford private insurance on the exchanges.
Say what CSR stands for.
I can't, cost reduction.
I know, cost
reduction units.
Reduction subsidies.
Cost subsidy
CRS?
reductions, CSRs. Is that right?
Thank you.
The acronyms in this business. I'm dyslexic, so I get always the letters wrong, and it is a nightmare. You have no idea.
Sorry.
That's all right. And my biggest fear is someone asks me that question, then I look like a nitwit. But anyway, the CSRs will allow more people to stay in, and when they're actually going the opposite way. I thought a few weeks ago with the continuing resolution, we were very, very close to getting CSRs. Right. And then the other thing is a high cost fund. You have certain people, a small number, but very expensive, patients who have chronic diseases, some complications around diabetes, but we have several patients in Colorado that spend between $500,000 and $1 million a year in healthcare costs, and they're covered. That cost, and they're on the exchange, so that raises the premiums on the exchange dramatically. So the idea is we get on a much broader pool, little slivers of money from everybody, and use that to cover these very high cost patients. That would dramatically, the estimate was by more than 30% would reduce the premiums on our exchanges, which again would attract more people into the exchanges, get more people insured, which I think almost everybody agrees is a very good way to reduce overall cost or the growth of medical inflation. So those are a couple obvious places to start, but I think we have to go Medicaid as well if we're going to continue to roll out Medicaid to other states. Tennessee still hasn't been able to get it through their legislature, even though Governor Haslam has been so supportive.
Right.
But I think we've got to look at every way we can, both in the private markets and in the public markets, to find ways to motivate and incentivize people to do a better job of taking care of their own potential medical ailments earlier. That's one, I can give you 10 different things, but that's one.
Right.
One example we did in Colorado, and we had to use foundation money to begin with, but for 5 years we got grants, a little over $5 million a year. Actually, it's been published, so I can say it was from the Susan Buffett Foundation. And we provided long-acting, reversible contraception to young women who asked for it. And in every case, if they came through a state clinic, we would always say, you're too young to be having sex. We advise you not to do this. But if you are going to make a bad decision, don't compound it with a second bad decision.
Right.
And so Norplants, IUDs, but each year, we have reduced teenage abortion by over 70%. It's actually over 72% in the last 7 years in Colorado. That's controlling costs dramatically. Teenagers, especially when they have unwanted pregnancies and they either abortion or especially when they have a child, they're not ready, they're not planning for that child. The cost to the system is really significant. Oftentimes they're premature. There are all kinds of other medical complications that increase costs.
Right.
Allowing young women to decide to have children when they're ready is a huge, it's not only medically safer, but a huge cost reduction as well.
Do you think the Democratic Party is moving farther left?
Again, I think that the core values are the same as they've always been. I think there are a number of people that have been so frustrated, and it's almost like we're, the cable news cycles, you pick the news show you want to watch,
Right.
and you get a steady diet of things that are going to enrage you or get you angry and more committed to the things that your party wants. And I think in many cases makes people less willing to compromise. That might have the appearance of driving the party left, but I'm not sure that we've moved that far from the basic, we want equal opportunity for everyone. We want that, again, inclusive prosperity where opportunity is shared evenly by everybody.
I have a question, but I'm going to start. What made me think of it, so I was reading in the Rolling Stone article. It came out just last week, right?
Yeah. As a baby boomer, if you'd ever told me I'd be in Rolling Stone, I would have laughed in your face.
Well, of course, Rolling Stone is going to profile the governor of the state that's most prominently legalized weed.
It took him a long time, just for the record.
But in that article, you explicitly would not, there was some discussion of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, that is the result, you all probably all know this, but I'll say it anyway, the executive orders that President Obama issued in 2012 in order to allow legal status and work permits and school opportunities to people who had been in the country. I guess you had to have come in before 2007 roughly, but in any case, brought children that were brought here, or people that were brought here as children. So you were being asked about the fact that this has basically died in Congress. President Trump rescinded those orders. He gave Congress 6 months to act. They did not act. The lifeline is that a federal court has, as you know, stepped in and said, it's put it in a bank where you can take, you can renew beneficiaries' applications, you just can't grant new ones. Now, so that's the back, you were asked you were asked about that, and you bemoaned it and supported the DACA recipients, but you explicitly would not criticize Trump for that, or the GOP Congress for not.
The
And
stupidest, mindless act I'd heard, but I didn't really want to criticize the person.
Yeah, and you said, but so this leads to my question: is how anti-Trump are you prepared to be as you sort of go out?
So, as I grew up, as I said, the skinny kid with Coke bottle glasses and, acne. My dad, when I was a little kid, told me that if I couldn't talk my way out of a fight, you deserved to get licked. But you also learn if you're being bullied, sometimes you just have to punch the kid in the face. And you might get beat up that day, but generally he'll never bully you again, right? That's a pretty good rule. I think Trump is a bully, and I think that we need to address him on his own turf. And I don't mean that means shouting back or calling him names or dealing with him the way he deals with his world. But I do think it means we have to be better at using his invectives against him and somehow pointing out ways that what a joke it is. Mm-hmm. And I think it's more powerful to look at some of the things. I mean, he claims to be a patriot, right? He mm-hmm. claims to be for make America great again. Well, American democracy, as great a form of government as it is very fragile. If you look at some of the things he's doing, he's attacking the fundamental foundations, right? A free media, an independent free media. He relentlessly attacks the media. The judiciary, an independent judiciary. That is the rule by law is an essential characteristic of American democracy. The national security apparatus, mm-hmm. the FBI, the military, whenever it suits his purpose, he attacks them. That can't go unanswered, right? And mm-hmm. taking DACA, you have the DACA kids who are, most of them came here when they were 1 or 2 or 3 years old. They have no home to go back to, right? And to say that we're going to send them to their quote unquote home is absurd. Mm-hmm. But I don't think to get into a name calling or that kind of right. attack is probably not as useful as finding ways to use his weight against him, just the way in jiu-jitsu or many martial arts you turn someone's size against them. So
there's a lot of talk that, do you see the candidates for 2020 having to balance how much you're in terms of, responding to what the Democratic voters or Democratic-leaning voters want, to balance an anti-Trump approach with presenting a new policy agenda? I mean, because you hear that a lot on the cable television news shows, including those that are sympathetic to Democrats, that Democrats don't have a message.
I mean, look at the economy that Barack Obama created, year after year. And I think, it wasn't a perfect economy, but he came into office with the worst recession in 100 years, right? You had to go back to the Great Depression to find an environment as challenging. And deep recessions like that usually have a long tail. So in other words, for a number of years, we needed to expect a mm-hmm. dampening effect on job creation. Well, despite that, he had one of the most successful presidencies in terms of job creation and the economy as any president we've had in memory. Mm-hmm. To say that Democrats somehow, aren't up to the task. And again, President Obama wasn't a master right. economics, wasn't a job creator. He was a community organizer, really, and he really focused more on making sure that civil rights were protected. That he tried to play a role in a lot of those difficult waters, and yet using basic democratic principles, our economy did amazingly well. And I think, there are some things we could do better in the economy, mm-hmm. But we did a lot of things. And again, attacking Trump that will be the ante to play at the poker game of 2020. Mm-hmm. Everyone's going to have to be able to attack Trump. I think that's just the nature of political enterprise.
Right.
But I think we'll see a whole ton of ideas, economic ideas. We'll see ideas around solutions to social challenges, all manner of representations coming out of the Democratic Party. That a lot of people have. I've heard two people, potential candidates, who have a couple pretty good ideas. They don't want to talk about them this early because then everyone else just copies
Right.
their idea. No, I'm just saying.
Sort of the way you governors steal each other's ideas.
No, governors, we'd love to be stolen from. Other candidates, less so. Maybe not so much.
I'm going to stay on Trump a second because, to segue from last night's show, ABC interview with James Comey, in which George Stephanopoulos asked Comey, is President Trump fit to be president? I want to put that question to you.
Well, Comey's no longer in office, so he has an easier time. If you look at how rapidly he changes his mind and how easily influenced he is by, emotional context or what someone said to him or what he sees on a cable news program, certainly that suggests that he does not have a lot of the character that we usually associate with someone being a president. Unfit to be president? Yeah, probably. There's certain things we should expect of our leaders at that level. And it's more than just consistency, right? It's a belief in facts, right? And a willingness to do things for others without regard to your own self-interest. I think that, my biggest, I'll tell you what I worry about, maybe not the most, but as much as anything, is the model that he is setting for kids. And that is, I don't know how long it's going to take us to recover from, I've got a son who's 15 and a half.
Right.
And all his friends and the parents, everybody always trying to make sure they understand that serving others is a great thing. And it ultimately makes you happier. And that doing something not for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the community is kind of what democracy is all about and why that's a good thing. President Trump kind of flies in the face of that and they're joking about him, right? He, at least in many of the circles that my son runs in, and trust me, these are not just Democratic families, they think he's kind of a joke. But they're still seeing this behavior, and it's being modeled for them at a very high level. And we've also seen a significant uptick in racist stuff written on buildings or, bullying behavior in the playgrounds.
I'm curious, in Colorado, what was his percentage of the vote?
He lost by about almost 5 points.
Okay, and then
But we're
what
a
is...
purple state.
Yeah, and what is his job approval today?
The last
Last
poll,
you saw.
I don't get to see as many polls as I should, so I'm not, but as of
Is it lower than the percentage he got?
Oh, yes, dramatically.
election day?
No,
Okay.
yeah, no, he's at I think 38% or 37% approval rating, very low approval rating. And he's been lower. He's actually come back up a little bit.
And like nationally, does that surprise you that he's that low, given that, the economy's humming along and all the other things he takes credit for?
I think the better question is, it surprised me he's still high as that, right?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that.
It is. Well, it's just it's a balancing act. You're right. The economy is doing well. You go to all these businesses and say, hey, we're going to give you take your taxes down from 35% to 21%. Is that a good thing for your business? Yeah, of course. And people are going to invest in those businesses. Long term, it's not going to be a solution, right? And long term, what that does to the deficit, I think, is going to probably harm business. But that's going to take a couple of years to come through.
Right.
But it certainly makes people happy in the short term, and I think that's part of the reason why he's still as high as he is.
Yeah. Well, the economy makes me want to ask you a policy related question again, because let's say, one in between that one. So how do you see this ending? Do you see a constitutional crisis ahead? Do you see him even resigning? Or do you see him running for re-election against you in 2020?
On the facts that we know so far, I grew up during Watergate, right? So I can remember I can remember saying this to my mother, saying, you know, I can't believe the president would ever do something like that. No, couldn't. I will never say that again, right? And especially with President Trump, who knows where this is going to lead. But based on what we know now as factual, I don't think he's going to resign. I don't think, as tantalizing the prospect might be, I don't think it's impeachable, at least as I understand impeachment processes. And, you know, my guess is he will run for re-election.
Well, he's certainly, I mean, I would say you're starting early, and yet he's starting, well, not all that early.
Just
but
because you
my
turned the
point
key
is gonna
doesn't mean I'm
be-
starting.
I have never seen this happen before. He started running for re-election the day after he was sworn in, and just today in my inbox there was the email boasting of how much money Trump for president has raised, and it's pretty remarkable. So yeah, I would think. I'm going to sneak in one policy question now. This last policy question. Indulge me, wonkiness here, wonkiness alert, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all. So get ready to take the mic. Since we were talking about the economy and the tax cuts, given projections, we saw most recently by the Congressional Budget Office this month, that their projections of the increased debt over the next 10 years is now up $1.6 trillion from what it already was. And we were already looking at a $9 trillion in debt growth over the next 10 years. And a lot of that just simply from the aging of the baby boomers, and they're drawing on the entitlement programs. So if you or any other Democrat were to get elected in 2020, take office in 2021, there's every chance in the world, I think we would all predict that you would, for the third time in a row, have a third Democratic president in a row would be taking office, inheriting a higher deficit that had been driven up under, this is not a partisan statement, this is just a fact. But debt would be at levels of GDP that would be unsustainable and maybe at higher than they've ever been since World War II, when there was an excuse for that percentage. What would you do? What would you do when your first budget?
Well,
I'm just talking general priorities. You've got the main pieces, the entitlement spending, the discretionary spending, and revenues. Why do you want this job?
And again, the challenge here, you can't sustain these kinds of deficits without running the risk of getting into a spiral. We've had low inflation. If inflation starts going up and we start raising interest rates, right, that means that we're going to have to spend more money to service the debt that we have, which means we're going to have to borrow more money, which means that the debt's going to go up and need more money. I mean, it's a spiral. I lived through the 1970s when I bought my first house for $26,500 in 1976. The mortgage rate was 14%. 14%, and there are other people that were borrowing money all the time at 16 and 18%, right? I mean, these were crazy times because this spiral got out of control. So the first priority has to be to figure out some combination of new revenues and lowering expenses and costs, so you get that back under control, so you're not at risk of something that just runs away from you.
Do you want to rule out curbing the growth of entitlement spending?
I think that that all the entitlements have to be looked at together, and I think that we're working right now in Colorado on trying to get the pension squared away, and it seems easy for people. Well, why doesn't the state just write a check and pay more money? It's the same kind of thing. We've got to figure out how to get what are the other levers that allow you. I mean, if we end up continuing to spend more and more money on entitlements, at some point we're not going to have any money for anything else.
Right.
And I think the first step is to say, all right, let's stop the growth of entitlements and figure out what that looks like.
Right.
But again, each entitlement has a very powerful lobby that is absolutely, they've got one pathway to victory, and that's to make sure their entitlement continues to grow at the rate it's been. Same thing with medical inflation. We've got hospitals, you've got doctors, you've got the pharmaceutical companies, you've got the insurance companies. each group has their single pie shape
Right.
of self-interest that they want to, that their lobbyists
Right.
get bonuses from. Well, somehow we've got to get everybody at the table and say, all right, everyone's got to kind of share the burden, but we can't do things the way we've done it before.
Yeah, because it's interesting. It would be the progressive argument. I mean, the progressives and liberals have always wanted to protect entitlement programs justifiably, but there's now an argument that as you keep squeezing all these discretionary programs that go to so many things, as you know, that progressives value, whether it's environment, education, research, and science, and women's, infant, children health programs, that you know, how progressive is that if you're, you know, and then there's revenues, and then so Democrats fearful of the tax and spend label.
Well, that's why I think that it's got to be done within a context of frugality. And you know, it's funny, my mom was a Depression child, and her father, ironically, was, I guess you'd call coincidentally, but he tried to open a distillery at the end of Prohibition. So in 1933, they repealed the Volstead Act. He'd been bootlegging, not for his friends. He was not in business, but he'd been making apple brandy, and he thought he'd get out ahead of everybody, take longer to age good whiskey. He could beat them, and he made some bad calculations, and he lost almost everything. So my mom, I mean, she never bought a dress. I mean, she learned to sew, and she sewed pretty much everything she wore and as much as she could for the rest of us, however much we might complain. She would wash tinfoil, tape it to the refrigerator door, and reuse it, saran wrap. I mean, she was the height of frugality. She thought that money was as insurance in case something bad happened. It wasn't for pleasure or luxury. And there's got to be some return to that sense of the value of a dollar, and making sure that we all see the interrelationship between what are investments and what are, you know, however important, but what are you know, things that are more than what is absolutely needed.
All right, now for the good questions. It's like David said, students first for at least the first three, and identify yourself, and have that question mark at the end of your statement.
Sure. So I'm Andrew. I'm a third-year undergrad here, public policy major, and I was wondering, since you've been working bipartisan both on a state and larger level since before President Trump got elected, if there's been a change in tone or the way that you and your Republican colleagues work together, either before or the whole big course of it, or just Obama and then Trump.
Interesting question, and it depends on the person. So there are some Republicans and some Democrats that are by nature collaborative and like working together. There are others that are kind of enjoy those opportunities to poke the other guy, to, you know, to grab political advantage wherever they can. You know, Bill Haslam, the governor of Tennessee, Brian Sandoval, the governor of Nevada. There are, you know, Republicans that are generally always collaborative. Steve Bullock, governor of Montana. I mean, go down, Maggie Hassan, who was the governor of New Hampshire, now the senator of New Hampshire. They are by nature collaborative and try to find ways to help other states, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. You know, when the Volkswagen settlement for the corrupt diesel crisis that they went through, when that money began being allocated, the Western mountain states all banded together and agreed that we're going to use our money, and we're all going to commit to creating a network for rapid recharging stations for electric vehicles. Well, it turns out that the 8 states, 6 of them have Republican governors. And yet, in the end, they all signed off on this. And we spent a bunch of time kind of talking with each other. What are the pros? What are the cons? But I think those kinds of things, when you get governors away from the hurly-burly of an election, they are able to more easily look at what's the best outcome for our whole community.
Thanks.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for coming first. My name is Chris. I'm a law student here at the University of Chicago. I should preface my question with 2 things. 1, I don't mean it to have implications beyond the end of your term as governor. And 2, I have the distinct pleasure of working for your Office of Legal Counsel this summer on them. So
awesome.
I'm genuinely curious. I'm curious if you wouldn't mind elaborating on your sort of paradigm for judicial nominations, how you think through who to nominate, who not to nominate, and how you make those kinds of decisions.
Such a good question. And I don't know, do you still have a law professor here named Douglas Baird?
We do, yeah.
Is he still here?
He is, yeah. Professor Baird is fantastic.
So he, just so you know, he grew up, his older brother was my best friend growing up.
Oh, what a small world.
And I guess I was very, very competitive when I was young. And we would go play wiffle ball in the backyard of the Bairds. And at the end of every day, Douglas and his brother Harry and their other brother Bruce would all go back in after a hard day of wiffle ball. And the first thing their mother would say is, well, did you guys learn any new Hickenloopers? Because it was evidently, I would say, well, if the wind was blowing in, the ball gets stuck in the hedge, it shouldn't be a double, it should be a triple. But if the wind's blowing out, all this could be discussed. I try to be fair and try to get everyone to agree to these things. But anyway, so you come from a good, when I opened my restaurant in 1988, one of my customers had gotten a law degree from the University of Chicago and says, do you know somebody named Douglas Baird? I said, yeah, of course. He goes, he tells some funny stories about you. When he talks about contract law and about how any language can be manipulated and how good you were at it as a child. So I've now appointed, we have 7 Supreme Court justices in Colorado. I've now appointed 4 as a non-lawyer. And I think it's fair to say that in my business, I opened 15 brew pubs all over the country, mostly in the western United States. I did 5 real estate development projects, fairly good size. I had over 200 investors. On a busy year, I would have 1 million customers. And I've never been sued, and I've never sued anyone. So I've never been in court. So me on my judicial philosophy, obviously, trial lawyers, I'm not, they're not wild about my judicial philosophy. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. What I've tried to do is find people that were socially liberal, again, placed an emphasis on civil rights and social justice, but that were also pro-business. In other words, high ethical standards, high environmental standards. We're not going to sacrifice the environment or how a business relates to its community, but that we wanted to be pro-business, even as we had these high civil rights and social justice, these other social issues. And I think that's pretty much, if you go look at the 4 I've appointed, they're pretty different, but they all come into that pattern.
Well, thank you very much.
You bet, and I look forward to seeing you next summer.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for being here today. My name's Kian. I'm a second-tier biologist. And my question has to do with the position for medical innovation in future healthcare policy. As a biologist, it's cool to see lots of the new growth within the field and the new technologies that we will have in the future. But how do you see those fitting into a robust national healthcare system that prizes medical innovation while also tries to keep costs down?
Sure. Well, done properly, medical innovation becomes one of the key ingredients to controlling cost. That being said, medical innovation is now moving so rapidly, and somehow society is going to have to figure out the policies by which we look at which choices do we allow each other to make, how do we assess the impacts and consequences of those choices, and what's that going to mean in terms of our economy and how businesses operate. Certainly, medical innovation has such amazing potential to, solve so many things that again, even the things that are happening now, I never dreamed I'd believe. I still can't believe some of the stuff that I'm reading about, but it's just going to keep going, right? The knowledge isn't going to stop, and it's just going to raise a bunch of ethical questions. I think those are probably even more important than getting too caught up into the, what are is innovation going to get slowed down or stymied by the lack? Were you asking about whether innovation would slow down the economy or whether regulation would slow down innovation?
I was more of asking just how do we fit as innovation into our future of healthcare, particularly as programs like the grants that are provided by the NRH are becoming increasingly on the chopping block to be decreased. So I'm trying to figure out how innovation will fit into America's medical future.
I think it's going to, I think, well, to quote one highly elected official, I think it's going to be huge. And I do. I think it has to be. Innovation, there's probably no better investment for our economy than to invest into research. And there's a guy named Richard Florida who wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class. And we took some of the points from that if you create a community, a sequence of neighborhoods, and they are oriented towards young people. So often the decisions on how government spends infrastructure, usually made by men over 50, right? And so, of course, they are things that young people don't care so much about. We tried, when I got elected mayor, even though I was over 50, we tried to get a lot of young people involved. And I mean, Metro Denver now has over 1,000 miles of bike trails. We now have more live music venues in Austin or Nashville. We now look at, obviously we have more brew pubs than anybody. but I think that comes right back to innovation, that you want the real future of and it's not just medicine, but it's of our country is going to be tied to how successfully we innovate. And right now it's a pendulum. If they're cutting those grants, I would bet my life that within 4 or 8 years, suddenly people will be putting massive amounts of research back into those grants so that we can continue to innovate.
Thank you, Governor.
Hi, Governor. My name is Mike Rolfes. I'm the Executive Director of Renew Chicago. And as such, we spend a lot of time kind of worrying about the future of our city and our state. And the one thing that Colorado and Tennessee seem to have in common are moving vans coming from the state of Illinois. And so, you'd alluded to pensions, and we have an enormous pension problem here. And even when we can find common ground, they seem to get invalidated by the courts. So my question is sort of, how did the Colorado miracle sort of happen? And what are things that are outside of our control? Obviously, we don't have sunshine and mountains the way you do. But what are, we'd be happy to steal a couple of good ideas from Tennessee and Colorado. So you have something to share for us for how we can reinvigorate Illinois. We'd be grateful.
Sure. And I mean, you do so much. Chicago, just for the record, I think is one of the most successful metropolitan areas in the world. And I look at Millennium Park. There's a Millennial Park. Yeah. But that is amazing. That came out of your civic pride. Businesses and individuals and philanthropists came together and said, how can we make this a magnet for people, not just all over Illinois, but everywhere? So take that asset you've got, and obviously you're involved in a big part of that. That's muscle. You don't want to lose the tone. Jim Clifton, who's the CEO of Gallup, sent me some information that shows that people, when they begin to doubt and distrust their local government, so their city government, their state government, when they hear about all the malfeasance or the corruption, if you look at the states where they have the largest outmigration of people, which Illinois is one of the worst right now, and yet you look at how many people distrust state government, right? You've got at least one former governor at a prison in Colorado, I'm aware of, might be two. But I think those, according to Jim Clifton, they track very closely. And I don't think that's just a coincidence. I think people want to be in a place where they believe in their government. And one of the challenges, and we see this both with Republicans and Democrats, is how do we rebuild that people's trust and belief in government again? And it's not going to be easy. I mean, President Trump is not making it easy in any way. But one thing you can do, and you already have done, you want to have the greatest education, especially higher education facilities. You guys, I mean, you're right up there with Cambridge and Boston in terms of the depth of research that you have here. That's the part that Richard Florida says the single closest correlation to your future economic prosperity is your investment in higher education. The more dollars being spent per kid in higher ed, more research, the stronger your economy will eventually be. And I would tack onto that K-12 as well. Those investments are critical.
Thank you.
Hi, Governor. Tom Knight from healthcare industry here in Chicago. I have a innovation and policy question in healthcare for you. With Dignity Health and CHI merging, you'll have the largest nonprofit in your backyard with a strong sense of corporate social responsibility. Have you considered leveraging Section 1334, which is the multi-state exchange plan option that is actually an option in the ACA that's still alive, to create a multi-state plan across the West in their footprint and experiment with now a large IDN and insurance companies' participation to see if you can bring down costs and create an exchange option that would be more effective in providing care to particularly self-insured individuals?
I haven't, but that doesn't mean they're not people. I mean, luckily we have many people a lot smarter than I am working in healthcare, not just in Colorado, but around. But that kind of, yeah, I don't know enough to endorse it, but that's something I'd love to look at. I think the more you can, in healthcare, the nice thing about the large nonprofits is that they really do have a nobility, right? A lack of self-interest. I mean, obviously their executives get bonuses and paid on a certain amount of success, but basically they have a very different frame of self-interest than for-profit hospitals and systems. And being able to allow them to merge and begin to get to scale probably should, allow us to get, really restrain that inflation I was talking about before, medical inflation. So is there some place that's written up where I can look at?
I'll figure out a way to connect.
It's that guy right behind you in the tie is my wrangler.
I'll figure out a way to connect.
He'll give you a card.
Give
Great.
you a couple one-liners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Governor. I actually split my time between Chicago and about 5 blocks from 18th and Wycoop. So,
Oh, no kidding.
I guess my question is Illinois obviously is not doing well financially, and with the Democratic nominee for governor wanting to make marijuana recreationally legal, I think there's some people who see that as maybe a stopgap or a solution to some of our tax problems. How has that worked in Colorado? Because I know a lot of that was earmarked for education, I believe.
First 40 million, yeah.
First 40 million, okay. But I still think Colorado is still on the lower end of K through 12. I guess I can't speak to higher education.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't know. So people are trying to think that this might be a solution or a panacea to our tax problems. And then what have you seen that, I guess, the extra money in Colorado?
So Colorado has a rough justice, a $12 billion general fund, total budget's $30 billion. Marijuana tax money last year was $220 million. It's a drop in the bucket, right? It's not going to get you all day kindergarten. It's not going to get you early childhood education. It's not going to get you any of those laudable public policy desires, but they're all very expensive. It does allow you, well, first, let me say I opposed it when it was proposed because it's in conflict with federal law. That's no fun as a governor. And no one else had ever legalized it. Even Amsterdam had only decriminalized it. So we had to create it from scratch, but our voters passed it 55 to 45, and so we did it. We did the best we could, and we made some dumb mistakes. We didn't regulate edibles quickly enough or aggressively enough, quickly enough. But I think overall, many of the things we feared have not happened. We thought we'd see a spike in consumption. No spike in consumption. We thought teenagers, since we legalized it, teenagers would think it was okay. And let me tell you, if you've got young kids or young grandkids, this high THC marijuana, every brain scientist I talk to feels there's a high probability that even if you're only smoking or ingesting marijuana once a week, your synapses are coming together and your brain is growing so rapidly that the high THC marijuana has a very high probability of taking a little sliver of your long-term memory. So if you did it just once a week for a month, probably wouldn't notice it. But long-term, they are almost everyone I've talked to is convinced that that's a serious, serious hazard. Well, by taxing marijuana, I mean, the same amount of marijuana we think is being smoked, rough justice, by taxing it, we are able to we're spending, $8 or $10 million a year marketing the dangers of consumption by teenagers. And I think that kind of stuff, we're using marijuana money, almost $20 million a year, for the unintended consequences of drug use, under the assumption that maybe that person's obviously just trying to get out. You can let them out. It is really distracting. Let him free! You look at chronic homelessness, right? So many people who are chronically homeless, huge expense to society, and these folks almost always have mental health issues. Very hard to raise money for them. But we find when we get them into supportive housing, they get into housing and then they get medication if they've got real depression or other some other condition that medication helps with. We get them into job training so they can at least get a job where they come in and get to have a social network that supports them. We get that stuff to them. They are very successful. Well, to get that money for expensive supportive housing, even though it's like 1/3 the cost of leaving someone living on the streets, it's very hard to get. We're using marijuana for that, almost $20 million a year. So there are benefits to it, but it shouldn't, and it's not going to solve your tax problems for the state. And I think you shouldn't look at it as a source of revenue, because I don't think it's a good thing for government to have an incentive to encourage people to do things that's not good for them. I mean, whatever. And again, I made a small fortune selling beer. So don't think I don't understand the hypocrisy. But we were very careful. We never cut and discounted our beer costs. We wanted people to have a higher quality beer that they pay 50% more. The notion would be that they wouldn't go out and get roasted. I think marijuana should be treated equivalent to alcohol for adults. But at the same time, I don't think that government should be suddenly lowering the taxes to try and sell more alcohol, and I don't think they should be lowering taxes to try and sell or doing anything to incentivize more consumption of drugs.
Has it been measured the, secondary effects or the externalities of marijuana in regards to decreasing the amount of policing or prison or jail expenses?
Certainly arraignments and jail, we are measuring that, and we saw a dramatic, I can't remember, 80% reduction in possession arraignments.
I guess the cost, is the savings
so
the state is...
I haven't seen that pulled together yet, but I'm sure they're working on it.
We have time for 2 more questions, which looks like about what we
Unless
have.
I'm very fast.
My name is Jay, and I'm a physics major in the college.
Huh?
I guess my question is more twofold. The first is due to increasing living costs in the Bay Area, a lot of startups are moving to Denver. So I was wondering what kind of policies there were in the state of Colorado to support startups. And the second question was more of the overwhelming proportion of tech entrepreneurs are actually foreign born, but it's very difficult for foreign entrepreneurs to start a business in the United States. For example, there's the International Entrepreneurship Parole, but that only gives parole status, not visa status. And also, in fact, with the new presidency, the Homeland Security is actually trying to repeal the parole. And if you look at nations like Canada or other nations, there's a startup visa. And I was wondering if you ever decide to run for the presidency, it would be on a platform you'd be willing to support a creation of a startup visa for within the U.S.
So yes, certainly. And in terms of Denver, we are now, according to the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, if you rank, the last time they did a national ranking of those cities on a per capita basis that have the most startups, 4 of the top 10 were in Colorado. And we now have a startup week that's in October, or end of September, or actually I take that back, second week of September, where this last year we had 19,000 people signed up, went to the paperwork and formally registered for Startup Week. And it is where people come and get tools and workshops and how to be more successful at their startups. So we are all about startups, and it is a cult. I mean, it's right now one of the hippest things you can do in Colorado, even if whoever you're talking to could be, I don't know, a librarian. They could be a service manager for a manufacturing, whatever they're doing. If you're doing a startup, you're of interest, and it's really become a status. And in terms of the immigrants, I'll tell you a funny theory, and I've been trying this out. I knew I wasn't going to get to a short answer. Once you started talking about startups, I was toast. They believe now that many of the inclinations, the genetic characteristics that we have that really help people be successful entrepreneurs and masters of startups are inherited. And they argue about how much is nature, how much is nurture, how much is inherited, how much is your family, your culture. But the people I've talked to suggest maybe as much as 2/3 of your inclination to be an entrepreneur, your ability to assess risk versus reward, and manage your ideas in a way that you really can have a successful business, that 2/3 of that is genetic. I wonder, and I would argue, that immigrants are a whole class of immigrants. They leave everything they know behind. They come to a place and they have to plan out what they're going to do for a job and an economy. They have to kind of, as just like an entrepreneur, they are making a startup of their lives. If that's true, that A, these qualities are inherited, and B, that immigrants are a filter, right? In other words, people that immigrate to a place generally are the people that are most likely the entrepreneurs from that society. Then you begin to explain why the US has dominated the world economy for the last 70 years, ever since the Industrial Revolution allowed entrepreneurs to have a much bigger leverage point on society. And I think that's a fabulous way to begin rethinking how we talk to people that are anti-immigration and begin talking about these kinds of visas to say, hey, this country, one of the reasons we have been so successful is we have all these people, and each generation, it can get diluted down, but if everybody who's come here is somehow connected to that kind of slightly more or maybe even significantly more immigrant type and more entrepreneurial type characteristics, genetic characteristics, that is a very powerful thing. So that's just an idea. I'm not trying to publish anything yet, but I think it's something that is worth considering in terms of immigrants and entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
No pressure, but we literally have 30 seconds for the last question.
We can be a minute late.
A short question, but probably a long answer. I'm Linda Swift. I live in the community. I'm a supporter of public education, and I'm wondering what you think we could do to reinvigorate our national belief in public education so that it would translate into the kind of program where you sounded impressive, connecting job training and high school education, but so that it would also translate into more states being willing to support early childhood education, pre-K, and all those things that we know really make a difference.
Yeah, well, and I'll give this the short. I think public education has got to, again, break down some of the narrow self-interests and look at getting those different interests working together on a more regular basis. We got the the teachers union in Colorado last year to support legalizing and putting into statute any local increase in mill rates. In other words, for local tax collection, you raise the mill rate, you get more taxes for your schools. Historically, and in almost every state, that only goes to the public schools. It doesn't go to charter schools. Well, we sat down with a lot of discussion and got the teachers union to at least stay neutral and allow this to get passed. And basically it was by showing them they have a broader self-interest than just this kind of narrow competition with charter schools, which is so often counterproductive, right? What we said was, if the charter schools and the public schools are both united in getting more resources for K-12 education and are more aligned, your probability goes up dramatically of passing some sort of tax initiative or something that gets more revenue. And I think those kinds of alignments where public education can demonstrate a level of innovation. My son went to a middle school where the teachers union agreed to let the principal do the schedules, and the principal had this wild idea, and he cut a deal with all the families. Basically, they went from 6.5 hours a day to 8 hours and 15 minutes a day, and they did that by having a quarter of the teachers come in an hour early and leave an hour early, and a quarter of the teachers come in an hour later and leave an hour later. So you basically added 2 hours onto the school day in terms of teacher coverage, a bunch of kind of study halls. So longer school day, and then they went to a longer school year, for which the teachers got paid more. But the deal was no homework. So this was a middle school. They did this also in the correlative elementary school. So parents loved it. Kids loved it. If you'd ever told me my son would say, sure, I'd much rather go to school for 8 hours than 6.5 hours, I would have said, you're crazy. He's never going to say that. But in exchange for no homework. And that school jumped into the top 5 of middle schools in the state of Colorado. And it started with a 40% free and reduced lunch percentage. Now, of course, middle-class families are racing in and filling it, so it's now much lower in terms of free and reduced lunch. But that kind of innovation, I think, is going to be, we've got to figure out how to get those ideas out and try them at scale and make sure that they are transferable. But I think that's how people are going to believe in public education. It's got to deliver.
Okay. Very quick thank you and goodbye so that we don't prevent you from making your plane.
And thank you to Jackie for doing a fabulous job of
Thank
commentating.
you. Now get out of here.